On the 7th of July 2005, London was hit by a series of explosions. You probably think you know what happened that morning, but you don't. This film is an attempt to refute the central conspiracy theory regarding the event. The conspiracy theory presented to us by the police, the government, and the media. Because that is all the official story is. A conspiracy theory. In case you don't know it, here it is. On the morning of the 7th, 3 British-born men drove down from Leeds to meet a 4th man at Luton train station. In the station car park, they loaded backpacks with homemade explosives they'd spent the last few months making in a bomb factory outside Leeds. They entered the station at 7:22 a.m. and boarded the 7:40 train to London, which arrived at King's Cross at 8:23 a.m. They then made the short walk to the Underground station, where, at around 8:30 a.m., they split up and each headed off to separate trains. 3 of the men blew themselves up almost simultaneously at 8:50 a.m. The 4th, Hasib Hussain, apparently unable to board a train, left the Underground, bought a battery in W.H. Smith, briefly visited McDonald's, then got on a number 30 bus and triggered his bomb at 9:47 a.m. This is the official story, and after a year of media dissemination, it has been planted securely in all our minds. But the official story is wrong. The events of 7/7 did not happen the way they've been described. This is not merely a question of interpretation, it is a fact. Hypothesis has been presented as truth. Speculation has been offered as certainty. There are unexplained discrepancies, inexplicable contradictions, and unanswered questions in the official story. What the British public has been presented is, in fact, a complex but contradictory series of lies. One thing that is clear is the terrible loss of life. And yet, despite demands from the Muslim community, the families of the victims and the victim support group, Tony Blair and the Labour government have obstinately rejected calls for a full, independent public inquiry into the attacks. What reasons have they given? We've been told an inquiry would prejudice the current investigation. We've been told an inquiry would prevent the police and government from focusing on future attacks. And we've been told an inquiry would take too much time, cost too much money, and divert resources away from the war on terrorism. Criteria our government unfortunately chose not to apply when deciding to illegally invade Iraq. And we've been told by the Prime Minister himself that a public inquiry would be a ludicrous diversion. Instead, we were offered a narrative to be written by the civil service based entirely on whatever information the police and security services chose to provide them. Tony Blair assured us that all our questions would be answered by this narrative. On December the 14th, he said, "I do accept that the people want to know exactly what happened, and we will make sure that they do." And he said, "We will publish a full account of all the information we have." And he pledged, "We will bring together all the evidence that we have and publish it, so that the people, the victims and others, can see exactly what happened." Well, Tony, the narrative has now been published. It does not tell us exactly what happened. It is not a full account of all the information you have, and it certainly is not all the evidence. So did you mean what you said? Or were those promises just more politically expedient lies? Let's take a look at the official narrative released by the Home Office on May the 11th, 2006. One thing that's immediately clear is that the author has not seen the raw source material for much of the evidence he cites. What we're being offered is at best second-hand information, at worst deceptive hearsay. Although the mainstream media have strangely refused to properly analyse the contents of the narrative, most of the issues raised by this document have been covered efficiently by the alternative media. So we will not go into detail about the items of interest that the narrative glosses over, or conveniently does not mention at all. Like the fact that identifying documentation for Mohammed Sadiq Khan was, for some reason, found at 3 out of the 4 bomb sites, or the issue of what explosives were used, something that incredibly is described in the narrative as still under expert examination more than a year after the attacks, or the fake Al-Qaeda confession released on the internet a few hours after the attacks through a server in Texas, or the training exercises taking place in London that day, based on a scenario of bombs going off at the exact same times at the exact same stations as the attacks occurred.
So they had to suddenly switch an exercise from fictional to real.
Or the huge amount of money made in speculating the rise and fall of sterling, the result of either foreknowledge of the event or extraordinary luck. Or the arrest of Haroon Aswat, widely reported by the UK media as being the mastermind behind the attacks, and by the US media as being an agent for MI5. Or the strange mistake regarding the time of the train taken by the men from Luton that morning. The police, the press and the government narrative all reported that the men took the 7:40 departure, but as discovered by bloggers and the alternative media, the 7:40 was cancelled that day. Instead, we will focus on the list of key evidence specifically cited in the narrative.